Yo, what up, everybody? It's Eric with Mind Melt Podcast, and today I have an exciting episode for you. I've got Judy Grisel. She is the author of the book Never Enough. And this book is so good. I read it twice in like a week. Not even kidding. I actually am kidding. I didn't fucking read it. I listened to it on Audible. I'm a cheater, but it's a great book. And I'm a drug addict for sure. I'm just an addict. I won't even say drug addict. I'm like addicted to whatever the hell I can get my hands on. I've always been like that, whether it be working out or driving fast or just anything impulsive. It's just like my fucking neurochemistry. Unfortunately, I was born this way. That's what I'm been saying for a while anyways. And this book is super dope because it's really scientific. It's not just like an opinion from a drug addict, but she also has had her own fair share of addictions. So you get this awesome nuance of a neuroscientist who is super pragmatic, evidence-based, no BS, and then you also get her personal experience. And this is a great way, to really kind of bridge the gap. Because a lot of times neuroscientists, they'll be talking about like the neuroreceptors in the brain, and it's like just totally from a scientific point of view. It's not really sympathetic to the people that go through these challenges. But Judy she fucking nailed it. She just really bridged this gap. So I am going to go ahead and let you guys check out this podcast. I would love feedback on this. I really want to have her on here again. I can't explain how much I enjoyed talking to her. So without any further wait, here is Judy Grisel. Okay, so I'm here with Judy Grisel, and she is an author. And Judy, I just read your book twice, and I've already recommended it to tons of people. So why don't you tell me a little bit about your book and just what inspired you to write it?
Sure. It's called Never Enough, The Neuroscience and Experience of Addiction. And I wrote it after being clean and sober. Well, I started it after being clean and sober about 24 years. Took a while to write, so it's been a while. And
How long did it take you to write it?
About 10 years. So I'll have 33 years, hopefully in July, I think so. But during that time, I wasn't writing books. I was writing scientific papers because when I was 23 and found out that I had a disease that was killing me, which was drug addiction, I thought naively and I guess, maybe understandably that, I'll just fix that disease so I can use, because I didn't necessarily want to die at that point, but I sure didn't want to get sober and stay sober. So I, even though I'd been kicked out of 3 schools and homeless and had basically no promise, if you were looking from the outside, I was very determined. So it took me 7 years to get my undergraduate degree and then 7 years to get my PhD, and I did a postdoc, and I was eventually a neuroscientist. And so I'd been tinkering around in the lab. I study genetics and pharmacology, and I'm especially interested in what's different about the brains of people like me before I ever picked up a drug. Compared to people who, like my husband, who is not an alcoholic or a drug addict. And I was doing that for, 20 years or so, and I realized I wasn't solving it, but I thought at least I could explain what we did understand for everyone else so that they could see, kind of what the landscape is for the neuroscience of addiction. So that's what the book is.
It's taken, the reason I loved it so much is because it has the gaze of someone who really understands addiction, like at a personal level. And then the fact that you understand it at a scientific level is really meaningful, because those roads don't cross very often, where someone has had an addiction and then has pursued the sciences of addiction to the extent that you have. Go ahead.
I was going to say that I think a lot of us, when we find out, geez, you're self-destructing, so you need to stop using. I mean, I think people go to pretty extreme lengths to try to find a way to use. And so in a way it's unusual, but in a way I think it's totally predictable because I had a natural proclivity for biology and I was curious and full of self-will, which sometimes is a good thing, like if you're going to grad school or starting a business or something. So I think I was just turned 23 and I thought to myself, don't tell me I can't use drugs. I'll fix this.
Yeah, I want to know, do you think that there will be a day when we'll be able to like take medication, or maybe we'll have some sort of advancement where we can tweak like the brain in the right way so that we don't have, because I know that it's more than just brain chemistry, obviously, but will there be a day where like we can like calm down impulsivity and maybe get more of the prefrontal cortex, so like we think of like the long-term effects of our decisions better,
Yeah, I don't think I'd say no to the drug. You've heard this before, but if there was a drug that would cure it, I'd take two, and use
right.
So that's not going to work. That's for reasons that, like you say, the neurochemistry is really complex, and each neurotransmitter is involved in multiple things. Like, for instance, serotonin plays a role in mood, but it also plays a role in sleep and in sex and in eating and in arousal. So if you take a drug that affects serotonin, all those things are naturally affected. So you'd have to basically chop off our heads, I think, to get rid of all the neurochemistry that's involved in addiction, which is most of the brain. I mean, really, most of the real estate in the brain is occupied with an addict's cravings or compulsions. I think, though, there could be promise for transmagnetic stimulation or transcranial electric currents that might draw, like you say, engage more of the prefrontal cortex. I think it would be interesting because, I should just say, there's nothing like this available right now, and I don't think maybe cure would be the right word, but it might be something that would assist people in making better choices. And the very preliminary data is sort of intriguing. But I think it would be fascinating, take a bunch of addicts in a room who are just getting ready to jump into the bag or something and say, hold on, let's use the transcranial stimulation so we don't need so much. And then they pass this thing around, and then what would they do? Just have a little bit? It seems almost like making a different person.
Mm-hmm.
So I have mixed.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, that's a really good point, because it's kind of like what you were saying with with SSRIs, for example. I think that this is going to be like maybe in 20 years or less, they're going to recognize just how much this affects the individual more than just a mood stabilizer. Because like what you're saying with the serotonin, how it affects so much of the brain. I mean, the long-term effects of this is like you're literally creating a different person. And if we value our identity at all, that could be a negative thing. But at the same time, I mean, I'm kind of a materialist, so I have a hard time
And what is the person? There are
exactly.
SSRIs for the first time. This is a different topic, but and then they say, I feel much more like myself.
That's true. Yeah.
Well, what were you before? I don't know. I wasn't as much myself as I am now. I'm more myself. Yeah. So it's certainly fluid. And maybe I would like myself just as well if I was more moderate and reasoned and all of that. But I don't know. I'm in my 50s now, and I kind of think there's some bright sides to being a little impulsive, high risk taking, not really respecting authority. I mean, I shouldn't probably say that over the radio waves, but I think if everyone was,
Conformist.
moderate and conformist, it might not be so ideal.
I actually tend to agree with you. And that was another good thing I liked kind of with the wrap up of your book. For me, I really struggle with this topic actually, like a lot, because I will go on like energy drink binges where I'll for like 2 or 3 weeks be like buying energy drinks every day. And first of all, I really care about the planet, and I think that they're like terrible for the environment and stuff like that. Like that kind of consumerism is bad for the environment. But also I care about myself, and I know that they're not good for me. And yet I will be standing in the grocery store or the gas station, and before I swipe my card, I will literally tell myself, you don't want to do this. Why are you doing this? You don't want to do this. Buy it, feel guilt, and still do it, And it's like this really, like I'm really good at getting outside of myself and looking at myself and being like, what the hell is wrong? Like, how are you this messed up in the head that you can like coach yourself through that entire process and yet you still proceed to do it? And the fact that I've gotten clean is a miracle by some sort. But,
so if you had this baseball cap you could put on that would really engage your prefrontal cortex when you're standing in line at the store, would you want to use it?
I think so. At least until I was able to save enough money for retirement and stuff like that, because there's also the financial implications of being impulsive, which is I'll get really good and on track with my finances, and then I'll be like, hey, I'm doing good, which is kind of like the same addiction thing. But then I'm like, hey, I'm doing good. Why don't I do this? And then all of a sudden, like, I'm not doing good anymore. And
so, I mean, we are really getting off topic, but I think it looks like the very preliminary data that we're seeing suggests that doing that would also have consequences where other skills would diminish. So kind of the no free lunch thing I talk about in the book,
right,
that if you enhance, your mood, then you're bound to get hungover the next day or something. It's sort of yin and yang. And so it looks like, the electrical current going in one place relatively decreases it in others. So maybe you wouldn't be such a good spouse, or maybe you wouldn't care as much about the environment, or, I don't know, maybe you'd care more. I mean, this is a debate and certainly an empirical question, but anyway, we don't have these machines yet. So at the moment, I would say we are not close to a cure for addiction.
I know. I think it's interesting though, because I listened to a podcast with Robert Sapolsky on some NPR podcast. I can't remember which one it was, and he was talking to someone that was a child porn addict, but he only became it after he had brain surgery to fix seizures. They took out a part of his brain, and then all of a sudden he was addicted to child porn. And that is, that's the concern for like any sort of stimulation of, neural pathways, because it's like you're saying, you never really know, because you think you're alleviating a problem over here, but we just know so little about the brain. And
well, it's interesting because with epilepsy, those, you really have no choice. If you don't respond to drugs, surgery is pretty much it. But I do think that we can change our neural pathways by changing our behavior. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I missed. And I think most of the field missed for most of the last century. So we thought that if we wanted to change behavior, we should change the brain to change behavior. But it turns out it's really a bidirectional loop. So if you change behavior, that also changes the brain. So it might end up, and wouldn't this be ironic, if the most efficient way to change the brain is to change our behavior. And that could, that's no easy task, as you know, and I know, but Maybe by being with other people or sharing honestly or hiking every morning at 5 a.m. Or skiing or parachuting, we could engage different pathways that would supplant those that are kind of hijacked by an addiction.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point too, because I think that it's just like, how do you get someone to start valuing one decision over the other, though? It's difficult. Like, motivation, the payoff, that you have to have payoff, right? Because like for me with my addiction, meth, the payoff load for dopamine is so huge that it's pretty hard to find motivation to do anything accomplishing, because you're not going to get nearly the same kick in dopamine. So I had to like find like 20 things to do that I was like doing good at, in order to, and I mean, like literally I had tons of different things that I was doing to keep me, like the possibility of taking the easy way out was just not there,
Mm-hmm. And the other thing is the easy way out isn't there. So in other words, if it really was working, you probably wouldn't have been so motivated. And that was definitely my case. When I started using,
that's a good point.
It was nothing but fun,
Mm-hmm.
and then it got less and less fun, more and more like a chore, more and more lonely, more and more isolating, and, more and more sort of like a death spiral. So at that point, I think maybe there's a little more willingness to try different strategies, and behavioral strategies happen to be the most effective right now.
Yeah. So what do you think about legal implications? Like, we live in a quote unquote free society that isn't so free when it comes to drug use, and we condemn it with the sword pretty harshly. What do you think a good alternative, or do you think the system we have is good for right now for drug addicts? What do you think a good direction for the policy is on this subject?
Well, I think a lot about this because, it's so timely with the marijuana stuff coming, but it's really, first alcohol and nicotine, then marijuana, and then why not everything?
Yeah.
And I guess, I think two things at least. One is that for people like me who are prone to addiction, I think biologically, laws don't really have a big impact anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was a pain in the neck to get to score. And, I was worried about getting in trouble, and did get in some trouble. But I think that, like, if you say to me, that's illegal, Judy, I don't really think that drives me. So some people hear that and they think, oh, okay, I'm not going to do it. But those are not the ones that would become addicted anyway. That's a whole, it's a different personality, not mine. So first thing is, legislation does not work, and neither does the war on drugs work. And I don't think our problem is that we haven't had enough people saying drugs wrecked my life. Don't do drugs, they wrecked my life. So laws don't work. Admonitions don't work. What would work? I really think education is the way to go. So probably it's logical to make all the drugs legal, because alcohol and tobacco are so incredibly damaging. There's no rationale for having those drugs legal and other drugs not legal, even though the other ones are damaging too. But you could parse this very finely, and I think you'd have a hard time developing a convincing argument that these drugs are worse than these other ones. And, we have psychedelics are highly, highly regulated, very illegal, and there's really no evidence that they're bad for you. So the law,
I definitely want to talk about that a little bit too, but let's
the laws are completely irrational. So in that case, let's not use the laws to base our decisions on. Let's use data, which is my favorite way to make a decision, because I can look at the evidence and then be informed. Is this something, what is it going to do to me? So I think when we do that with all addictive drugs, what we see is that the more you use them, the more the returns diminish, the less well they work, the less benefit we get, and the more costs we accrue. So that is irrational too. So I tell my students and my own kids, and my mother hates this, but it seems sensible to me. If you can occasionally use a drug and it doesn't wreck your life, I don't think that's so bad. It's maybe interesting.
Well, and just to kind of butt in on that a little bit, people use drugs every day. It's just not the ones that are illegal. So people use caffeine like it's going out of business, and I do myself. So and like that's something that I struggle with. That's like a real struggle for me. Like I go through like.
Oh, do not worry about it, Eric, because caffeine's not bad for you.
Yeah.
And it doesn't hurt your life. But people drink every day. I mean, people have,
right.
Not everybody, but a lot of people have a drink or two a day or 4 drinks a week or something. And there's no evidence that's good for you.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And those are legal.
Yeah. Well, I like I don't drink, but and I don't smoke anymore, but I used to, obviously. But I mean, caffeine is like kind of like still it's a crutch for me. And that's what I don't like about it, is that I use it for the wrong reasons. And I use it in the same way that I am like a coffee connoisseur of sorts. Like I use it like I love coffee. I love making coffee. I love the ritual of coffee. And I'll catch myself running down the same slope as I did with drugs, which is, abusing it and using it to get through the day because my day might not be as exciting as I want it to be, which is at the crux of it. The problem for me is that I value, like I spent most of my life in serious danger, and now it's like very, very boring, and I think that a part of me like has a really hard time with that kind of mundane, 9 to 5 lifestyle.
Well, if you're dependent, I mean, I talk in my book, I have the same love for caffeine, and I kind of give myself a buy on it because I think it's not bad for my life. And in fact, there's some evidence that it maybe is good, but I think I told the story. I was in Arches National Park or something, and my stove broke. I was
yeah.
And I ended up eating the coffee grinds because I was so dependent. And then I thought, why not just do heroin? I mean, it's a little bit of an exaggeration, but I see your point that wouldn't it be nice to be free of all dependencies? And I think, that person's a little more enlightened than I am because I appreciate this dependency until my stove breaks or, I'm at a hotel with terrible coffee or something, and then I'm a raving lunatic.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think it's healthy to like be opposed to any sort of cyclical thing. Like I try to monitor, because for me, like what I envision is the slippery slope. I'm like doing caffeine every day and I'm like, oh, let's up it a little bit, and I mean, I haven't done that yet, but that's a fear of mine for sure.
It protects against Parkinson's disease,
Say that again.
It protects against Parkinson's disease.
Really?
Yeah.
Caffeine does. I figured that would aid in Parkinson's.
No, it's beneficial for some things. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
That's really interesting because, like, I guess the reason why I would think that it would aid to it is because Parkinson's is kind of the result of abusing your dopamine. So right?
Well, it's not really abusing it. It's probably toxins that get into the dopamine terminals. And it looks like caffeine interferes with that process.
Good to know. All right. Well, thanks for saving me. Now I can drink coffee more.
Drink away. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about psychedelics. And I really loved this chapter because, to be honest with you, about halfway through the book, I was thinking to myself, okay, this is pretty one-sided. I was getting this idea in my head that as soon as I heard you go into psychedelics, I was like, oh God, she's going to start saying bad things about psychedelics, because for me, I am like, that was a huge part of my life. I haven't done psychedelics since I got clean, essentially. Not that I wouldn't, I'm not against them. And I was just waiting for you to drop this bomb of like, psychedelics are bad. And then you went in and you talked about the positive benefits of them and how there wasn't much negative evidence for it. And I was like, that's actually literally when I emailed you, because I was just like, okay, she's got me. And so,
Eric, I go with the data. I mean, I hate to say it, but I think that it's not really my opinion I was trying to share so much as the evidence. And some people are mad at me about that. They think, well, she's a proponent of this. Well, I think I'm a proponent of information.
Well, that is definitely why, I don't think that you're pushing any agenda whatsoever, especially after we got to this chapter. And there's a book that came out. I can't remember who authored it, but there was a book talking about
Michael Pollan, probably.
Oh, no, not Michael Pollan. This is actually negative about weed. And there was.
Oh yeah.
I can't remember what the name of the book.
The guy in New York. Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't read it, but I've read the reviews. Yeah.
Yeah. So and just sometimes people get into this lane of trying to prove something, and they'll make the data fit their narrative. And that's always a concern when I read books, because lots of authors do that. It's just the truth. And I read a lot of books. So, and I've seen it a lot in the books that I've read. And so that being said, when I got to this chapter, I was really relieved and I just loved it. So what, I know that part of it was the evidence. What are your views on psychedelics, and have they positively impacted your life from your use of them? Because you've used acid, right?
Oh yeah. I loved it. In fact, when I told you the story before that I wanted to cure it so I could use, my dream was that I just wanted to drop acid on Easter. I thought if I could do that once a year, really, it would be,
on Easter,
I could live. It seemed like a perfect day for it to me. But anyway, I do like Easter. I think we don't know a lot, and there's much more that we don't know than that we do know about all the drugs. So we're really at the very early stages of neuroscience research, and other than the fact that humans have been messing around with pharmacological substances since there have been humans, we haven't really systematically looked at them. So I don't know for sure. But the evidence so far suggests, first of all, and most importantly for me, and the argument that the book was mostly about, and the reason you found all these chapters one after another kind of discouraging probably, was that every addictive drug is addictive because it causes a squirt of dopamine in this kind of news pathway. Something interesting is happening. And that something interesting is so compelling for humans with this big cortex that we, gamble, we look at porn, we can't wait to check our new media posts or whatever. I mean, it's just, we're sort of primed for news, and actually all animals are. So is something happening? Well, drugs are a big happening and when they're addictive, they're used because they stimulate that pathway. And the psychedelics, and I'm real clear in the book, those are only the psilocybin, mescaline, LSD, DMT, which is an ayahuasca, maybe the frog thing, the DMO.
Yeah, 5-MeO DMT.
Yeah. But not marijuana, not MDMA, that are sometimes all grouped together in a group called hallucinogens. And I hate that grouping because hallucinogens is like a garbage can of anything that messes up your perception. Whereas psychedelics are really specific drugs. Anyway, they do not release dopamine in this particular pathway. They're not self-administered by non-human animals in virtually all cases. And so they're not addictive. Um, and not all pharmacologists, but the vast majority of pharmacologists, like finding a biologist that doesn't believe in evolution, hard to find a pharmacologist that believes psychedelics are addictive. I mean, it's that sort of sensible.
You'd have to be someone that's paid off by like the FDA.
You'd have to be really way out, because they don't release dopamine there.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean they're good for you necessarily. It just means they're not addictive. And I'm not against drugs. I'm just against addiction because it almost killed me and it kills a lot of people. So it's really devastating. But the evidence is curious that some evidence suggests that these drugs might be pro-social and pro-connection and pro-insight and pro sort of spirit. And I think that, famously, Abby Hoffman said, this is medicine for the soul. And it sounds a little hokey, but I think that I don't think there's any panacea, but I think this could be a useful tool for some people. And in my own path, of course, it's not, empirically derived evidence, but I think that the insights I realized about myself and my place in the world and other people and how we kind of fit together and how there was so much more than just my little head and concerns, my own personal focus, helped me kind of get over myself when I realized, do I want to live or die? And I decided to try to live. So I don't think they hurt me.
Yeah. Well, I've done my fair share of psychedelics. So I've done DMT a lot, and I've done a lot of acid and stuff as well. But I definitely agree with you 100%. Like even through all of my addictions, like when I like even can be hard on caffeine sometimes, as you just heard. But or fast food. I'm really hard on fast food. I think fast food and social media. I mean, social media is one that I think is a really bad addiction. And I think that there's bad outcomes from it. And I, have a hard time with it because I'll like delete my social media accounts for a while and then I'll get back into it and stuff like that. But it just seems like it promotes a lot of unhealthy behavior and interaction between people. But psychedelics, like I have had like quote unquote bad trips on psychedelics. Like one time I got arrested on a huge dose of acid and got tased by the police, and it was brutal. I've never talked about that on my podcast either. There's only, like me and the people who know about it. I've never talked about it publicly. But so that was a really like quote unquote bad experience. But even the next day after that experience, I was like, I could not stop explaining to my wife how this experience that I had like in my head while under this was so profound and important, and it changed my outlook on the world in a positive way, and it made me want to like be better to the environment and better to the planet and better to the people that I love, even while being arrested and like waking up in jail. It was just crazy. And so I mean, like you said, that this is just anecdotal. I've done whatever I could do when I was younger, and I have yet to have any real negative thoughts about the positive benefits of psychedelics. I don't think they're for everybody, people with mental health issues and things like that. But it does seem like if we could just administer it to anybody in public office, we might be able to save the world. I don't know, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think Grace Slick tried that, or that was did you hear that story? I don't know if it was true, but she supposedly was at the Nixon White House and had a bunch of acid under her fingernails. This could be urban legend, it probably is.
That's a really cool urban legend, though.
Stuck her hands in the punch bowl, and I mean, I think it didn't work, though, did it?
Right.
So maybe it's not true, or maybe it didn't work, or maybe we just need to treat each other better in other ways. But I think it's a really interesting class of drugs.
It is. Yeah, I agree with you. And I just, I think that it's it's so important though that people like you that have all of this data and information about addiction, like also talk about this, because a lot of times drugs get cashed in with drugs. And I think that's like a really bad part of the media and information on drug use. Have you ever read Chasing the Scream? I think that's what it's called, by Johann Hari.
No, I didn't. Partly because no, but I think I'm going to write that down because I think I've heard of it before. But partly because I was so busy trying to get things done, and I didn't want to cloud my writing by like taking someone else's ideas. So I put off. I have a stack of books in my house that is like 10 feet tall. So hilarious. I'm going to get to those someday, like maybe this summer, but I haven't had a chance yet.
Okay. Well, I just, I know we're getting close up on the time that I asked for you to join me today. But I wanted to bring that up to you just because I thought that, have you ever heard of Johann Hari?
Yeah, I have.
Okay. Yeah. That book, Chasing the Scream, is quite interesting because, he talks a lot about, and I think that addiction, there's a lot of nuances that have to be put in with addiction. So obviously there's like the chemical dependency that comes with drugs. And then there's also your environment, and there's obviously your brain chemistry. So he explores the idea that it has a lot to do with how people aren't included into society. Like they're outcasted for some reason, whether it's in poverty or class systems or racial systems or whatever it may be. And he kind of talks about that Rat Park. Have you ever heard of Rat Park study?
Yeah.
Okay. So he talks about Rat Park, and it's a pretty interesting read. And I was going to ask your opinion on that. But he's also pro legalization, so you might enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, I was not any of those. I think I was, my life looked pretty good, and I just really liked getting high the minute I did it. And I think I wasn't, there was nothing other than the pain of living, that was driving that liking. So I think it's true. I think where social class and the enriched environment stuff really comes in is in recovery. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that I had a lot more opportunities to get social support, get medical support, get wheels, car to drive than other people. And I think it's really hard to recover if what you have to look forward to is nothing. Right, so right. I think that some of the disparities in the incidence of addiction are due to the lack of social and psychological and health support that people have, Mm-hmm. Not supposed to be that way.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I feel so fortunate because I had like countless hands when I was ready to change, and I can't, I mean, a big one is my wife. Like she somehow stayed with me through all this. I think it's almost, a miracle or something. Like but I honestly think that because there was like this fork in the road for me, and it was either I could continue doing my addiction, which I was pretty tempted to do. Like I could break up with her. This is like how I thought about it. I could leave her and do it for the rest of my life and be like, quote unquote, happy doing that. Or I could like get clean, and it didn't seem like that was going to be really a good direction for me to go, but I could get clean and stay with her. And at the time it seemed like I wanted to do that because I didn't want her to not be with me. Like I thought we're just like a really good team. Like I thought that, we should be together for her too. But it was like, really strange. I chose to get clean for kind of this weird reason. And now I look at it and I'm like, well, duh, that's the better option. You know what I mean? But back then it was like, or another thing that I thought of, and I'm so glad I never tried this or anything, not that she would have done it, but I thought about trying to get her to do the drug with me and becoming addicted with me so that we could both do it together. And I mean, she's not the kind of person that would do that anyways, but I think it's crazy that thought even came into my head, you know. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
amazing.
So
she sounds like a good woman.
Oh yeah, she definitely is. So, well, thank you so much for talking to me. I hope that this was fun. I was a little scattered because I had all these like things. I should have written them all down. I had these things I wanted to ask you, but you know, I know for sure you nailed them all. But
I just hope that if people understand how the brain adapts to drugs to cause addiction, they'll make better choices, because I do think that being naive about how it works is really hurting us, especially children, but everybody. And so it never hurts to get informed, and the purpose of the book is to make it palatable. So I'm really glad that you felt that the information was understandable and clear, and I think it is pretty up to date. So hopefully people will have better insight.
Have you tried to consult with any politicians or public figures on this subject?
It's funny, I'm going Wednesday to the Pennsylvania State House to talk about Suboxone use and in recovery from opiates. And I'm talking to lawyers and bar associations and some more therapists and psychiatrists and high schools. But I really think it's not anybody's fault. The rate of the accumulation of data in neuroscience about addiction is too much for anybody to keep track of. I don't know it all. I don't know everything that comes out. So it's kind of overwhelming. And I think you can't get it, though, from the newspapers, because they don't have the kind of background knowledge to really interpret the scope. So unfortunately, I think people are confused a lot about specific drugs, what they do or don't do, which are bad, which are good. I mean, there's just so much wrong information out there. So I think it would be useful. I'm hoping on Wednesday it's useful for at least for my Congress, to understand how opiate addiction occurs and what methadone or Suboxone, buprenorphine have to do with that, and how they can be helpful and how they can not be helpful. And there's, once you understand it, then it's very clear to a rational mind what's the best strategy, I think.
Yeah. In your book, you talked about how some legislators were proposing to take back life-saving overdose support for people that were reoffenders.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where that is. That's a pretty crazy idea. I do know that I've heard it said. It might be that those are some podunk,
people. Yeah, there's a lot of those.
Don't have a biology degree. Yeah, I mean, it's not only bad biology, but it's bad ethics and bad morality.
Terrible.
And so, but I understand people are frustrated, because what do you do? These addicts are destroying themselves and taking a lot of other people down in the process. So it's not pretty, and I understand the frustration. I think obviously that's not going to help, but neither is it going to help that naltrexone or Narcan, which is a drug that's been around for 50 years and should cost pennies a dose, is something over $100 to administer to an addict. So that ain't so great either, but that's the way we do it here. So,
well, do you think that? I promise I'll stop bouncing questions your way. But do you think that, problem that we're facing is also our healthcare system, because people are self-medicating as a way to try to fix some of their problems. And doctors aren't taking I know that that's kind of a stretch, but especially with mental health problems, because we have such a bad health, preventative healthcare system. Preventative is the key word there. We have a terrible healthcare system in general, but preventative health care is almost non-existent. And I think that healthcare for mental health is almost laughable in this country. Nobody really takes I know that they're starting to focus on it a little bit, but mental health in this country is such an issue, and homelessness is getting out of control. Homelessness is a big issue, and a lot of the people that are homeless have either mental health problems or addiction problems, which I would venture to say is also a mental health problem in a way,
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I was just at a Kennedy forum, and you remember that Patrick Kennedy helped pass the Parity Act, and the Parity Act says that mental health issues and substance abuse get the same resources as physical health problems. So it's the law. It's just like the Civil Rights Act was the law. It takes a while to enact that, but people should be aware that, like you say, it's so important. We do what we can to prevent heart disease and stroke, but shouldn't we do what we can to prevent mental illnesses and substance use disorders? And I think we just have to catch up with the law. So you're exactly right there. I would not blame drug companies. The purpose of drug companies is to make profits for their stakeholders.
Yeah.
And that is their obligation. So anybody who thinks that drug companies are in it to try, because they're so altruistic that they really want to help people, is just blind. The purpose, their goal, and actually their legal obligation is to maximize profits. So wake up. You know what I mean? Just wake up. They're not the good guys. Right. So what is that? What could we do? And I really think there's no one to point the finger at. We all are to blame.
Good point, yeah.
Certainly the addicts are responsible for their irrational behavior, but society in general colludes in so many ways. It is a culture of escaping reality. And so we have to face the music about that. And we have to face it, I think, together, and hopefully in new ways that will improve the situation. I think neuroscience is a critical component of that, but so are schools and doctors' offices and community centers and police officers. I think it's really got to be a group effort. It is such a devastating epidemic we're in.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you so much. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Where can people follow you on Twitter, or do you?
Yes, they can actually. There's Never Enough Drugs on Twitter.
Never Enough Drugs on Twitter.
I'm not great on it, but I'm trying to get better. So if you follow me, maybe that'll inspire me. And also, you could write to me at neverenoughDrugs@gmail.com, and I'd be glad to answer questions if anybody has any. And I appreciate your time too, Eric. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe for all future episodes. Next week, I'm excited to have a friend of mine, Janae, whose father was falsely accused of falsely sentenced to a life term in prison. So I just really, really am excited to talk to her and we're going to do a 3-part episode. The first one's just going to be kind of like the events leading up to his arrest. So hang out with me next week. And for now, have a great rest of your week. Thanks so much.